For the past 2 years, I've been studying Japanese every day, and I decided to make this video as a benchmark for anyone to see what's realistic to expect in terms of progress in this time frame, as well as for myself to look back on and hopefully see how far I've come. Whilst you might have guessed that within these 2 years I would reach native-like fluency, unfortunately, with the difficulty of the language and my relatively short daily study time of around an hour and a half per day, it's fair to say I have a long road ahead of me. Within the Japanese learning community, there's a huge amount of debate over what the best method for study is, and I made my own conclusions based on methods recommended by other people in the community, so you can see how much progress I've made within these 2 years and decide if they're the right methods for you as well. It's also pretty common in the community to say that you need to be studying this insane number of hours, like 8 hours a day, if you want to see any progress whatsoever. And when I started, it would have been useful if someone told me that if you've decided your maximum amount you can study is an hour a day, 2 hours a day, or 3 hours a day, or whatever the number is, then don't feel bad about not progressing as fast as others, because learning a language relies so much more on consistency rather than intense motivation anyway. When I started, I'd actually already been interested in learning Japanese for a long time, but I didn't start before that because I guess I was intimidated by the amount of time that it would take me to learn, because I would see things about foreigners who had lived in Japan for like 10 years and then they couldn't speak to anyone anyway. But I'd already watched a decent amount of anime growing up with English subtitles, so I knew probably 100 or 200 common words, or I'd be able to recognize them when I heard them. So it meant that at the start I actually stayed motivated just because of that, because it felt like when I was learning a new word, I'd probably already heard it before, so it didn't take that much effort to learn those 200 words pretty quickly. But the first proper studying I did was learning hiragana and katakana with an app called Scritter and also the Duolingo course, and that took probably only like 2 weeks. And then from there I didn't really know where to go, so I went to YouTube and I searched Japanese learning, and I found videos from channels like Matt vs Japan talking about immersion and Anki, and also more complicated aspects of Japanese like pitch accent. But I was actually kind of dissuaded because I remember that at the time I watched a Q&A video from Matt where the title was something like, "Can you progress with 1 hour of study per day?" And I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, you might be able to make some progress, but it will probably take you like 10 years to reach any high level. But then after that I found a channel called Leave Kiwi, where this guy had studied for 500 days and only like an hour per day, and he made what I considered to be like reasonably good progress. So after that I was motivated to use whatever methods he was using, so I installed Anki and a core 1000 words deck, which was made of the 1000 most common words in Japanese. But it was actually pretty difficult to use the deck because it used kanji in sentences, and obviously I couldn't read the kanji at all. So I decided that I needed to learn kanji. So I got this textbook called Remembering the Kanji, and also an Anki deck that went along with it. And for the next 3 months or so, I studied pretty much only kanji, writing them out from the book and then using the Anki deck to memorize them until I'd worked my way through the whole book. which was really boring to do and is probably the only textbook I've ever gone through in that amount of time. But it did mean that after that, reading the kanji and the sentence cards was so much easier. So I would still recommend the book, even though Heisig likes to use like the weirdest ways to remember things. But I think the method is good. So by this point, I'd already made the habit of using Anki every day, but I was getting bored of switching deck every so often when I finished one of the smaller decks, like the core 1000 words deck. So I decided to find a bigger deck, which was the core 2k 6k deck, made of the 6000 most common words in Japanese instead. And for the rest of the year, I didn't really do much else in terms of studying. I just made some progress in the core 2k 6k deck, studying like half an hour per day. At the end of the year, I booked my first trip to Japan for 3 weeks over the Christmas break with my best friend. And whilst I was there, I noticed something pretty worrying, which was that despite studying for the last year, I did not understand Japanese that well at all. Even though I understood some fragments of conversation I overheard, and my speaking was just about enough to get by with ordering food at restaurants and booking trains, a lot of the time, words I should have known according to Anki, I didn't recognize in speech because my listening just wasn't good enough. But this actually gave me new motivation to study harder. I even went to the cinema on my own to watch my first full-length Japanese movies without English subtitles. And by the end of the trip, I decided that my trajectory had to change. Otherwise, I'd end up wasting all the time I'd already invested. On New Year's Eve, I was at a shrine, deciding that my goals for the new year had to be to start immersing properly, because clearly only doing Anki wasn't working. My goals for 2023 were to aim for 400 hours of immersion through any native content, be that YouTube, anime, or Netflix, as long as it didn't have English subtitles, and then to also finish the last 4,000 words in the core 2k 6k deck, and then start sentence mining from there. Over the next year, I just undershot my goals, racking up 330 hours of immersion and around 150 hours of Anki. My immersion mainly consisted of Japanese Netflix with Japanese subtitles, which started with anime but later moved to dramas with more realistic and complex speech, as well as from podcasts and radio dramas that I'd watch on my way to and from university. You'd think that just under an hour a day of content and half an hour a day of flashcards would be easy to accomplish, but sometimes life got in the way and I'd find myself in bed at 2 a.m. only to realize I hadn't finished my reviews and I had to do them then. Sometimes I'd even be missing out on important things like spending time with friends just because I couldn't manage my time well. If I were to give myself advice, it would 100% be to make a routine around studying where I'd do my Japanese first thing in the morning and then not have to worry about it for the rest of the day. I finished the core 2k 6k deck around the end of summer of my second year studying, and at this point I knew that clearly the next step would be to start mining sentences for vocab and making my own cards. But what I ended up doing instead was spending months without doing any Anki and trying to decide the best way to make my own sentence cards instead of just starting and working out as I went. Unfortunately, it was actually only in December of my second year studying that I actually started the habit of mining 15 new words per day. So as for where I'm at right now, I'm currently just about able to pass the N2 mock exam and understand most native content to a reasonable degree, provided I have Japanese subtitles to read at the same time. My current biggest issues are not being able to recognize words when I don't have the kanji to read at the same time, and also my lack of grammar knowledge. I'm still basically unable to speak much Japanese besides super basic conversations, but I'm actually fine with that for now. And that's because up until this point, my goal has been to improve my listening to a degree where once I start speaking, hopefully I'm able to hear any mistakes that I make, and that should mean that I'm less likely to form any bad habits with my pronunciation once I do decide to start speaking. But going into my third year studying, I have some new goals. The first being I want to pass the N1 exam, and to do so I need to know a lot more words. The N1 is rumored to contain somewhere around 10,000 words, and assuming that most of the 7,000 words I know so far are applicable to the JLPT, I still have a lot of work to do. My second goal is to go to Japan over the summer and find something like an internship. To be able to make full use of this time, I need to be able to improve my speaking to a degree where I can make friends with some native speakers. So my plan going forward is to keep immersing, sentence mining, and begin speaking practice. Lastly, I just want to say that learning Japanese, or any language for that matter, is most of the time not a romantic process. Especially when you're learning the language away from the country it's spoken in, 80% of the time is just watching videos and doing flashcards alone in your room. Even despite this, I'd still argue that there's immense value to learning a new language. So if you've decided to study a foreign language, then stick to it, and at some point your effort will inevitably pay off.